My rage intensifies because I am not a victim. It burns in my psyche with an intensity that creates clarity. It is a constructive, healing rage. So what is holy anger? In his book, Pedagogy of Freedom, Paulo Freire writes about a sense of legitimate anger, noting Jesus' anger in the story of the cleansing of the temple. In the gospel texts, Jesus overturns tables and chases out the merchants and money changers who seek to profit from and take advantage of the poor in a sacred space. Holy anger is anger felt and expressed in response to injustice. Holy anger works on both individual and collective levels to rouse people to creative action. Commonly termed righteous anger or righteous indignation, I've named this rhetorical concept holy anger to convey its value and energy. Anger that is worth honoring and acting upon because it can disrupt harmful status quos and drive the construction of more loving and just realities. This video project explores the rhetorical use of holy anger. For our purposes, I define rhetoric as the design and use of language and symbols to reach an audience and affect reality. I pose the question, what does angry rhetorical practice look like? How does it work, and what does it accomplish? First, we'll establish a challenge, how we conceptualize anger, its purposes, and its effects. I'll share some ideas from Black, Latinx, and white scholars to theorize holy anger. Then, we'll take a look at holy anger in the African American prophetic tradition through two texts, Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, and the Black Lives Matter Mission Statement, What We Believe. We'll end with some food for thought, including the role of holy anger in education. The challenge, holy anger in the public sphere. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle describes anger as an emotion that we should feel in response to wrongs committed against us. To be virtuous and successful rhetors or communicators, according to Aristotle, we must express anger at the right person, on the right occasion, in the right manner. How then do we determine what counts as appropriate and inappropriate expressions of anger? In our contemporary public discourse, we have inherited a framework based in liberal Enlightenment theory that determines when, how, and on what topics a rhetor can express anger, and which rhetors are allowed to express anger. This framework assumes that calm speech with controlled emotions is the most rhetorically effective speech, to the exclusion of narrative, personal experience, and impassioned argument, which are deemed not just out of bounds, but dismissible. This is especially true if the rhetor speaks from a marginalized position and expresses anger about an issue that does not warrant public anger according to the logics of dominant discourse. For example, it is more acceptable to publicly express anger about terrorism by Islamic extremists than about the disproportionate incarceration of Black people in the United States. Moreover, it is more acceptable for a white person to express anger about Black incarceration than a Black person about the same topic. In short, the use of anger is generally discouraged as a rhetorical strategy, and the marginalized rhetor's expression of anger in particular violates public expectations of decorum. The content of their speech, based in their lived experiences and encounters with injustice, is not considered objective, reliable knowledge. The rhetor is viewed as untrustworthy, confrontational, incapable of productive engagement with the public sphere. Thus, the marginalized rhetor's anger is routinely dismissed by people in dominant positions who respond with avoidance, retaliation, demonization, deflection, minimization, and other strategies of disengagement. Bell Hooks warns that the public pathologization of anger is an act of racism that preserves structures of power. William Sokoloff builds on Hooks' concept of anger, arguing that anger is a dialectical political emotion that emerges from abuse, triggers reflection, and leads to creative responses to political oppression. Audre Lorde also speaks of anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future. She has both individual and collective anger in mind when she says, "Focused with precision, anger can become a powerful source of energy serving progress and change. And when I speak of change, I do not mean a simple switch of positions or a temporary lessening of tensions, nor the ability to smile or feel good. I am speaking of a basic and radical alteration in those assumptions underlining our lives." In order to use anger towards social transformation, we need to challenge the concept of anger created by the conventions of dominant discourse, which treat anger as fundamentally irrational, aggressive, divisive, and hateful. How can we effectively communicate holy anger in a culture that dismisses anger, for an audience that is conditioned to dismiss anger? We need rhetorical strategies that invite the audience into the experience of anger and help them to imagine their role in addressing the cause of their anger. In other words, we must conceive of anger as an emotion that can be shared among people of goodwill, which awakens us to new visions of one another and the reality in which we live. Gloria Anzaldúa calls this process conocimiento. Conocimiento es otro modo de conectar across colors and other differences to allies also trying to negotiate racial contradictions, survive the stresses and traumas of daily life, and develop a spiritual, imaginal, political vision together. As rhetors, how can we participate in a visionary rhetoric of love that uses anger to pave the way for justice? To this end, I theorize holy anger as an indispensable emotion in recognizing and responding to injustice. A positive emotion, not to be carefully managed but to be fully felt and processed both individually and collectively. And a useful rhetorical tool with explosive potential, not to cause violence but to disrupt our complacency and rouse us into new ways of seeing and acting. Now, this video explores holy anger in action in the African American prophetic tradition. We'll look at how rhetors in this tradition use anger to interrupt and disrupt violent status quos, opening a space for alternative realities to be imagined and created. The African American prophetic tradition. The African American prophetic tradition began in the 18th century as Black people adapted rhetorical resources from Enlightenment theory and the Christian tradition to argue for their own humanity and liberation from slavery. They insisted that God was on the side of the oppressed, and that the statement all men are created equal included Black people. Through poems, stories, letters, sermons, speeches, and other genres of text, they constructed counter-narratives to the dominant narrative of white supremacy and Black inferiority. They reshaped tools of white colonist discourses to serve purposes of liberation. Multiple strands of the tradition have since developed, and they don't always draw on Christianity or American founding ideals. But all rhetors in this tradition demand drastic change through their revision of America. As they put forth their alternative vision, they often employ holy anger as a rhetorical tool. Examples include Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman?, Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of July?, Malcolm X's The Ballot or the Bullet, and Angela Davis's Embassy Auditorium speech. For this analysis, I've chosen a historical text, Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, and a contemporary text, Black Lives Matter's What We Believe statement, for their articulations of both anger and alternative vision. Side by side, these two texts also demonstrate continuity in the African American prophetic tradition through the civil rights movements of the 20th and 21st centuries. They are central unifying texts in their respective movements, driving organized action for racial justice. I Have a Dream. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his most famous speech as part of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. Today, the speech is most remembered for its concluding vision of racial justice in America. It's important to note, however, that before King elaborates the vision, he gets angry. The following analysis divides I Have a Dream into 6 parts. Part 1. Expressing Black American anger. Through a series of metaphors, King sets up the motivating problem.
100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later,
King's impatience and outrage rises with each statement capturing aspects of the problem. He uses anger to show that slavery exists in new forms in the present day, and Black Americans are still subject to social and economic marginalization. King's next move is to condemn the American government and people.
America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
His metaphor implies that civil rights are willfully and dishonestly withheld from Black people. Then he expresses their collective anger.
But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
The anger contained in these statements is confrontational, driving the energy of the demand. Part 2. conveying the power of Black American anger. Now, King expresses anger via prophetic warning. He speaks directly to well-intentioned white members of his audience who believe that Black Americans must accept social progress as a slow process.
This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism.
He describes what the future will look like if the American government and people continue to deny Black Americans their civil rights.
Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges.
King paints the disastrous consequences of ignoring the demands of justice. His images convey the power of Black American anger to overturn the existing social order and prepare the way for a more just reality. He characterizes anger as a vibrant source of energy that will push America toward radical necessary change, and he uses rhetorical anger to disrupt the complacency of his non-Black audience. Part 3: Collective Processing of Black American Anger. After expressing Black American anger, aligning that anger with the cause of justice, and imagining a future of justice facilitated by angry action, King invites his Black audience to process and act upon their collective anger.
In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred.
Here, King does not locate the destructive power of bitterness and hatred in anger itself, but rather in unprocessed anger. He insists that anger has creative power. Part 4: Invitation to allies to participate in anger and action. Next, King turns to his non-Black audience.
For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is.
With an appeal to interdependence, he asks them to commit to the cause. And a pronoun shift occurs. In the first half of the speech, King's we refer to Black Americans to voice their concerns and experiences. From this point onward in the speech, there is a larger we that encompasses both Black Americans and their allies. He is about to invite allies to get angry with them. Part 5: Expressing the anger of Black Americans and their allies. King builds the momentum of a new collective anger by naming the traumas of anti-Black racism and repeating variations of "we cannot be satisfied."
We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
In this last line, King changes the wording to "until" to direct his audience toward a vision of future justice. He employs one of his favorite prophetic biblical images from the book of Amos to help his audience imagine the abundant force of justice as driven by holy anger. Part 6: Alternative Vision. Almost to his conclusion, King encourages his audience, both Black Americans and their allies, to keep fighting.
Go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed.
King expresses his belief that his audience has the power to transform the racist status quo. What follows is an expansive vision of what will result from their action, an alternative vision of reality. Through his repetition of "I have a dream," he offers specific images of a different America. He elaborates the vision with physical locations in America's geography, beginning with states in the South.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day
King invites his audience not only to envision a better America, but to collaborate in its creation. He uses pairs of metaphors to suggest total transformation of the present reality.
With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith,
he reminds his audience that the work of justice is not only liberation but social transformation. Another biblical image, the stone cut from the mountain, represents the kingdom of God, or an alternative reality that has yet to be formed. In summary, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech uses holy anger to critique the existing social order, facilitates individual and collective experiences of holy anger, imagines an alternative to the present reality, and invites his audience to work together and use holy anger to enact the alternative vision. Now I'm going to draw some connections between MLK's I Have a Dream and the mission statement of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter began when George Zimmerman was acquitted for the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2013. Alicia Garza made a series of Facebook posts that she described as a love letter to Black people. She began with her anger at the jury's decision. She stated her refusal to accept that this is the way that things are and always will be. At the end of her letter, she wrote, "Black people, I love you, I love us, we matter, our lives matter." Garza's letter was an affirmation of the value of Black lives in a reality where Black people are systematically devalued and dehumanized. Thus, Black Lives Matter was born out of an expression of holy anger. The phrase Black Lives Matter encapsulates an alternative vision of reality, a world in which Black lives are valued and loved. Since 2013, chapters have formed from Brazil to Australia, making BLM a global movement. The founders, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza, prefer not to lead the movement but to remain in the background and facilitate a horizontal organization. I'd like to take a look at the co-authored What We Believe statement on the BLM website because it unites the many chapters of BLM with a statement of shared goals and principles. I want to show how Black Lives Matter's mission statement, like King's I Have a Dream, participates in the African American prophetic tradition by naming the evil, providing assurance of overcoming it, and supplying a basis for resistance. My commentary will move through these four themes: holy anger, love, alternative vision, and protest. What we believe. Holy anger. Black Lives Matter's mission statement opens with, "We've committed to struggling together and to imagining and creating a world free of anti-Blackness, where every Black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive." Right away, the statement is framed by BLM's alternative vision. Next, it presents a brief history of BLM, a history that begins by naming the problem: state-sanctioned violence and anti-Black racism. The language in this section embodies indignation and defiance. The impetus for that commitment was and still is the rampant and deliberate violence inflicted on us by the state. Enraged by the death of Trayvon Martin, we took to the streets. With this, BLM makes clear that their work is motivated by anger. That anger is the foundation for what follows, a description of their vision of the beloved community and how the community works toward justice. Love. BLM's statement, like MLK's speech, begins with the concerns of Black people and centers Black well-being. We are unapologetically Black in our positioning. In affirming that Black Lives Matter, we need not qualify our position. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. Responding to audiences who oppose BLM's Black-centered language, the statement asserts that their movement is based in love for Black people. As in I Have a Dream, BLM's mission statement, We, also focuses first on Black people before extending its message to allies. Every day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and to co-creating alongside comrades, allies, and family, a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. We work vigorously for freedom and justice for Black people and, by extension, all people. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. These sentences use a language of healing, family, community, and collective, insisting that the work of justice involves caring for the well-being of self and others. For BLM, justice means creating and celebrating. Alternative vision. BLM also affirms participants' ability to create an alternative reality to replace a current unjust reality, even more than the words disrupt, dismantle, and oust, which occur a few times in the text. The we statements of mission and action begin with the verbs build, make, work, practice, nurture, foster, cultivate, embody, co-create, heal, love, and celebrate, emphasizing the creative work of justice. And instead of using more traditional words like rights and opportunities, BLM chooses the word power to emphasize Black agency and action. They build an alternative vocabulary for their alternative vision. Finally, BLM intentionally includes specific groups of Black people. For example, we make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We foster a queer-affirming network. With each of these we statements, BLM creates for their audience a vision of an alternative reality, a community of Black people where Black women and queer and trans Black people are loved and included. As a whole, BLM's What We Believe statement, in response to an anti-Black reality, channels holy anger as community motivation, engages the audience in an alternative vision based in care, inclusion, and collective action, and offers specific language that the audience can use to share anger and enact the vision of a new world in which Black lives matter. Protest. To conclude this section, I'd like to talk about how Black Lives Matter designs protests aligned with their What We Believe statement. Like MLK at the March on Washington, BLM uses public protest to confront anti-Black racism. In 2014, after the grand jury's decision not to indict the policeman who killed Michael Brown, activists chained themselves to a Bay Area rapid transit train on one of its busiest days, Black Friday. This was one of many nationwide actions organized through the hashtag Blackout Black Friday. With this action, BLM employed the disruptive power of holy anger to interfere with business as usual and prompt Bay Area residents and police to pay attention to a problem they were interested in denying or ignoring. Several days later, the policeman who killed Eric Garner was not indicted. The New York chapter of BLM organized a protest in which activists stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, the West Side Highway, and the Lincoln Tunnel. By stopping traffic with their bodies, they physically and symbolically confronted their audience with the problematic reality of racist norms that put Black lives in danger. These angry rhetorical acts of confrontation and disruption shake their audience out of their complacency with the way things are. Then, the audience is invited to participate in transformative action. Concluding thoughts. What We Believe and I Have a Dream are texts that ground their prophetic vision in holy anger. In both situations, the rhetors have had their voices challenged by dominant voices that seek to invalidate and dismiss their concerns. The rhetors, BLM and MLK, are even treated as domestic terrorists by the U.S. government. Yet they persist, speaking with power and anger, addressing fellow Black people and their allies, inviting their audience to participate in total social transformation. Through their expressions of holy anger, they express a love for themselves and a love for others, a love for a more just society. In each text, anger is conceptualized as a communal experience and disruptive energy that serves collective vision and action. Critique is paired with imagination to drive the construction of more loving and just realities. So, what if we truly believed that anger in response to injustice was the only rational response to injustice? What if, like Audre Lorde, we believed that response was not a problematic burden for the rhetor, but a vital energy that she could draw upon in order to be rhetorically effective? What if the processing of anger included the expression of anger in the socio-political context that gave rise to that anger? These texts in the African American prophetic tradition demonstrate the creative, healing possibilities of holy anger.